Hello again, and welcome to another instructional video on the build of a solar rover slash solar sprint racer slash energy innovation solar car. In the last two videos, we showed you how to attach some alligator clips to our solar power, our energy source, so that when sunlight hits our solar panel, electricity current will flow through these wires and into our motor. The motor will transmit that electrical energy into kinetic energy, and the gears the transmission, will transmit the kinetic energy in the spinning motor into our axle, right? So as the gear spins in the motor, it will in turn spin the gear that's connected to the axle, and the axle is going to have some wheels on it. So I'm going to just use the piece of balsa wood that comes in the Pitsco kit as my chassis, which is sort of the structure that I'm attaching all of the different components of the vehicle to. In order for the axle to spin freely, it's connected to the wheels, but how are we going to attach this onto the chassis? And that's where our spacers come in. So we have 4 spacers that come in the Pitsco kits, 2 for each axle. So you're going to want to attach the spacers onto your axle before you put the wheels on. Okay, so and the wheels are going to go on the very end. So I'm choosing a rear wheel drive, right? And so this is going to be the back of the car, and so I'm going to attach the wheels onto my axle here, and I'm just going to push those on there. I think there's also some blue rubber bands that come with these. I'm going to do it just so it's flush. So the axle is flush with the edge of the wheel there, or close to. All right, and so you can see that the spacer is sort of on the inside there, like that. Wheel. Right, so I end up with something that looks like this. I've got a rear axle with 2 spacers, and I'm going to glue these spacers onto my chassis so that the entire assembly of the axle can still spin, right? And the spacers are just going to kind of hold the axle assembly onto the chassis. But because they're hollow tubes, the whole axle can still spin on the inside of it, right? And my car can move. All right, so the problem now is that I've got my axle in the middle, my gear in the middle of my axle, right? So I'm going to need to use a knife to cut a little slot into the chassis. If you put the gear very close to the wheel, it's possible that the gear could be sort of off to the side and you would need to cut into your chassis. But you also run the risk of perhaps the gear touching your wheel, which may not be a bad thing, right? So there's lots of possibilities, and you can design these solar vehicles a number of different ways. And so I'm just sort of going over some basics here of one way to do it, but there's lots of different ways to do it. But the general idea is that you need to have some way to attach the axle to the chassis where the axle can still spin, but it's connected onto your vehicle. So I'm going to measure how big of a slot I would need, and I'm just going to cut a groove out like that. And so we'll go ahead and do that. If I look at this entire uh, piece of balsa wood is about 10 centimeters, and I roughly want it to be centered. So at about the 5 centimeter mark, I'm going to make a line there. And the axle itself is about half a centimeter wide. And so I'm going to make the slot just a little bit wider than that. And so I'll make it an entire centimeter. So going on either side of the 5 centimeter mark to 5.5 centimeters and 4.5 centimeters. I'm going to make a line there. In terms of the entire length, the diameter of the axle, we can kind of see here that it's about 4 centimeters or so. And so to give myself just a little bit extra room, I'm going to make that 5 centimeters. And so we go ahead and cut out a slot, something like that. One of the safety precautions is to always sort of cut away and never towards yourself. So now I've got, so this would be the underside of my car. Suppose it could be the top, but I have the axle sort of underneath the car here. Now I want to make sure that I place the spacers in such a way so, like, for example, if I have the spacers directly centered on my chassis, something like this, then you can see there's a lot of play left and right where the axle can slide. So I kind of want to use the spacers to space, right, the distance between the wheel and where the chassis is. So I want there to be perhaps a little bit of play, but not too much. And so I'm going to put this, if I put the spacers in directly against the axle, then there might be a lot of friction between the wheel and the spacer as it spins. So if I put it a little bit off from the wheel and then affix it to the axle, I'm sorry, and then affix the spacers to the chassis, then they're not going to be touching the wheels, and the wheels will have a little bit of play, but not too much where the car might veer off course. And so we end up with something like this. Now, here's where it's really important. You can kind of maybe just by inspection take a look at, having the axle perpendicular to the chassis is pretty important so that my wheels have righteous alignment. And so here's where you'd want to take some time to measure to make sure you're the same distance away from the edge of the chassis before you attach your spacers down. And so we'll do that in the next video.